right, the 7 deadly sins of enterprise software. Thank you for coming. Let's get started and we'll start walking through this. The first thing that I'd really like to do is introduce myself. Originally I was going to put a picture of myself up there, but then I realized how close I'd be to the screen. It seemed pointless, so instead I'll just describe it to you with words. I'm a principal solutions consultant at Accelerate. I've worked in enterprise software for a little over 10 years. My original goal in life was to be a translator. It's what I went to school for when I graduated. I tried to be a translator, and turns out I was not very good at it. So I had to come up with a plan B, and that meant working in global content management systems. Turns out I could read a few different languages, so I was putting copy and content into an enterprise CMS, and then that turned into me gathering business requirements, so I was a business analyst. Then that turned into me writing code for the application that consumed the content, and then I was architecting things and installing things, and now I'm right here standing in front of you as a consultant or an architect who's worked in enterprise content management for 10 years. And the result of that, though, is because of my experience working in content management and working with enterprise software, I'm one of the worst sinners in enterprise software. So if you think this is a presentation about me telling you what you're doing wrong, no, this is me telling you what I've been doing wrong. So I'm confessing to you, I am one of the worst sinners. Every single one of these things that we'll be talking about is a mistake that I've made. So I'm here to confess openly to you, I'm a sinner. All right, so with that terrible admission in mind, I'd like to get to know you as well. But as I've said before, I'm a developer, and that means that I'm awkward around people, and I'm really not one to be interacting with you directly. So instead, if you've gone to Menti, let's go ahead and ask some questions. One of the first things that I'd like to get to know about you is just who you are and what do you do. So let's go ahead and start voting. You'll have about a minute and a half to just tell me what your position is at the company. Are you a C-level? Are you a vice president, a director, manager, team lead, or are you just the person designated to go to conferences? It can be any of those things. And everyone goes to conferences, it looks like. Oh, no? All right. So we've got some managers, no vice presidents. I guess they're at home taking care of everything else. But yeah, some of you go to conferences. That's great. This is how we deliver dynamic content. It's just me taking data from you. So I do have one other question for you. So what I want to know next is, well, what department do you work in? Since we're talking about enterprise software and deadly sins, the question is, which department is the most sinful? And if you'd like to go ahead and say that you work in IT or anywhere else, oh man, you guys are quick. We gave you so much time. Okay, IT, that's to be expected. All right, so perfect. That's where I've worked most of the time. I did start in marketing though. So that's where I can share with you that some of these sins don't come just from IT, they come from marketing. I used to work with product managers quite a bit, so I've been adjacent sinful there. All right, so let's jump back to the presentation and what I'd like to do. So again, if you're just now coming in, I'm going to give you one final shot to scan the QR code because we'll keep asking questions throughout. This is our low-level market research. Is we throw up a QR code and we ask you questions and you tell us the rest. So I'll give you a second to get that in. We are GDPR compliant, by the way. We're not going to share your data with anyone else. But oh yeah, just the sins. Yeah, just that one very awkward thing. That's what we'll make sure is public. But yeah, we'll go on. If everyone's ready, let's get on to the next slide. Oh, you know what? Okay, so we're still in the introduction but this is our very awkward getting to know each other phase. So, okay, why are we here? I'm hoping it's the really cool title, but if not, I'll explain some of the details there. That one, we're calling it 7 deadly sins, but really it's mistakes. It's the issue here is what we want to do is we want to admit to mistakes that we've seen and committed in the course of building enterprise software. So when you hear sin, think of mistake. And it's not just the case if I want to ramble on about bad things that have happened, because that's not really fun. And we learned in a presentation this morning, don't lead with the negativity. So the next real goal here is I want you guys to believe that there is an impact to these kinds of mistakes, that they do impact at the enterprise level. It's not just a bad thing that happened, but there are things that can have a long-lasting impact to these kinds of mistakes. And so I'll be sharing some examples. And then finally, it's to get us to repentance. And if you've never heard that word repentance, or if you're unfamiliar with it, it can be a religious term, but it comes from the Greek, and it means to go in the other direction. So another term for repentance is just course correction. So we're talking about mistakes that have happened, how they affected the business, and what course correction we can take throughout this. So with those goals in mind, let's start diving into really the meat of the presentation. So bleeding edgeism. Oh man, what is bleeding edgeism? Well, it's when you get so excited about technology, it's so bleeding edge, it's so cutting edge, you've actually cut yourself and now you're bleeding. So it's the abuse or use of the absolute most cutting edge technologies until it's leading to bleeding. Cutting edge tech is really cool, but the problem is it's cutting edge. If you work in delivering websites and web applications, what that means is that you might be using technologies that only work in one browser. Well, that's pretty dangerously cutting edge because you're affecting users. It could be using libraries or frameworks, or it could be even be using whole platforms that are just brand new, and it's so new you have too little support. And a great example of this that I've seen happen, by the way, is someone says, hey, you know what? We need to build this website in React. We need to build it in React. And if you haven't heard of React, awesome, I'm so proud of you. But React is a JavaScript framework. Facebook developed it for Facebook. They needed a way to make it easy to make web applications highly interactive, very responsive. And let's keep in mind, Facebook has 1 billion users. So that's what they developed React for. But now someone is saying, you need React on your website. Well, maybe your team doesn't know React. Maybe you don't know React. And maybe also this is just a static brochureware website and it's not interactive at all. So what does React have to do with this at all? That's a great example of bleeding edgeism, where you're just chasing after the latest, greatest technology only because it's the latest and greatest. And another example that I've heard quite a few times in recent years and quite a few discussions is NoSQL. We should be using NoSQL. And if you ask the question, well, what's wrong with SQL? They'll say, well, it's old. Well, that's a terrible reason to just go to NoSQL if SQL is old. Let's not do that. So that's bleeding edgeism. That's discrediting an older technology just because there's a newer one. Let's not do that. That's a sin. Okay, but fine. We've talked about, well, that's sinful. What do we do in spite of that? Okay, so we've recognized that. I've seen a few nods. I haven't seen anyone hang their head in shame, so that's good. There's hope. What we've got to remember is course correction. Technology is a tool. That's the really important lesson here. Technology is a tool. It's not the answer. Technology is a tool that helps you build a solution. So if you're looking at something like React, or if you're looking at something like NoSQL, if you hear about MongoDB, or if you hear like .NET Core or Elastic or these other words, just think about the problem that you have. Do some research. Build a small proof of concept. Not a big one, but think about the very specific problem you have, create a proof of concept, and then see if it actually solved the problem that you had. And if it did, well then you're not committing bleeding edgeism. You're doing some good, safe research, but don't pick a technology and then throw it up on the entire implementation to see if it sticks. That's where you're going to cut yourself. Okay, So now that we've talked about bleeding edgism, data hoarding. Oh man, what is data hoarding? Internally, we've debated as to whether to call this data stashing or data hoarding. It's still up in the air, but I like the idea of hoarding because, especially in America, we've got that TV show Hoarders, and that's terrifying because you just see a whole bunch of stuff packed into a house and you wonder, why? Why are we hoarding? But what does this have to do with data? So let's talk about what data hoarding is. Really, it's just collecting more data than you need. Now, we've been at a conference already where everyone's talking about data, get more information. Is that wrong? Am I saying that that's sinful? No. You should get data. That's a good thing. What you shouldn't do is collect all of the data that you could possibly need on the planet and then do nothing with it. And I don't mean just do nothing with it, I mean not have a strategy for it. If you've got a website or a web application and you've thrown in Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, and you've got entrance surveys and exit surveys, and now you've got heat maps and all this, well, that's great, but is that informing any strategy decisions? If all you're doing is collecting data and you're not analyzing it and interpreting it, you're just letting it sit somewhere, well, you're hoarding data. And what you've done is you've potentially stressed out the individuals that have had to insert those different codes and update those databases, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't want data hoarding. So what should we do instead? I'm not saying that analytics is bad. I'm not saying we shouldn't collect it. What I'm saying is that data isn't going to answer a question that you're not asking. So rather than starting with, well, we just need to throw analytics at it, let's start with, well, what don't we know about our users that we should? Do we know if they really like the red button? Do we know if they're really into this content? Do we know if our users are landing on our landing pages? Ask a question, and once you've asked a question, implement the data solution that's going to get you the answer. If you want to know why a user's leaving, well, maybe that's a good reason for an exit survey. And if you want to know which pages they're being clicked on, well, that's a good excuse for Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics. Those are good reasons. And then what you have to remember is, now that you've decided, well, what question do I have? And now I'm implementing the solution that'll help me get the answer. My solution isn't there yet. I don't have an answer just because now I've made a smart decision about what analytics tool. We're going to find the answer once I dive into the data to see what it's going to say. So it's not just a case of I'm not going to implement data. It's a case of I'm going to implement the right data at the right time and make sure that it's answered the question that I was asking. That way we're not hoarding data. And by the way, if you've had to throw up a GDPR notice on your website, let me ask you, did you have to do that? Have you actually reviewed what data you're keeping and whether you needed that data to begin with? If you don't know why you threw up that GDPR, you may be considering data hoarding. So just ask the question. Am I getting my questions answered about the data? And if I'm not, well, let's figure out what questions to ask. Okay, so data hoarding's one thing, but what else do we have? Software negligence. Oh, this is a terrifying one. This at one point was a lovely house that I'm sure people absolutely enjoyed living in, and now it's run down and beat down, and it's not a place that you'd want to stay. Well, what happened? I mean, the bones are still good, but something's clearly happened with the house. So what is software negligence? Well, it's when you neglect to keep up with your software. That's essentially it. You've got a piece of software, maybe you bought it, maybe you developed it, but you're not going to do the basic maintenance that's required to keep it alive and well. You're not doing hot fixes, we're not doing software patches, we're not doing the things that will make it alive and well, and it'll start to become dilapidated and we'll run into a problem. I remember a case a few years ago, a project that I was on, where we had an implementation and we were starting to get bugs with how our users were interacting with a certain feature of the software. And what we found was that we had about 50 or 60 hot fixes and patches that we needed to apply to the software. We had been neglecting it. We had been neglecting it quite a bit. So we've reached the point that now we have bugs. We don't know why we have those bugs. And we're going through the software patches and we're saying, oh no, some of these patches may fix our bug, but we don't know which ones. And so we went to DevOps and said, hey, can you please patch it all at once? And they said, no, that'll take a week and a half. We don't have time for that. And I said, but we have bugs, please help. No, it's gonna take a week and a half. So we spent some more time trying to find out what was our problem. Eventually we got to, well, we think it's going to be this set of hot fixes. We deployed them, it didn't work. Well, let's try the next set. We deploy them, didn't work. So that week that our DevOps was trying to avoid doing, they did. But it ended up taking 6 weeks because it was deploy, test, deploy, test, deploy, test. We did eventually get to the bottom of our bug. Our bug was we had 50 patches that we should have deployed. Yep, felt great. I'll own it. So, okay, so what do we do? Well, we've got to remember good habits are hard to keep. Software maintenance is a habit. This should be a habit if you do development in-house, or if you've hired someone to do your development for you. This is a habit that needs to be kept. Now, there's 2 ways that you approach this good habit. One is try the cloud. If you've heard that joke, the cloud is other people's computers, I mean, it's not that far from the truth. But the advantage of going with, well, I'm going to put this software in the cloud, is that now it's someone else's problem. So if you're having a problem with hot fixes and patches and just that general neglect of a product you've bought, the cloud is a good idea. It will help. Now, an alternative, and this is especially helpful if you've developed your own software that you've got in-house. Those could be web applications, or those could be desktop applications, whatever the case may be. Just budget time and money on a quarterly basis to keep it up to date. That means checking to see what kinds of libraries does it have? Have they been updated? Do we just have features that need to be updated? General maintenance. Just make a quarterly plan to sit down, have a few hours where you're going to focus on what it takes to keep it alive and running so it doesn't become a dilapidated old house that no one wants to live in. So that's a pretty basic course correction. So we've talked about these. Let's go to another sin that we'd like to dive into. Now, copypastaphilia. I know, so this is the part where they tell you in marketing that you have to tease someone. So before we get into it, I'd like to do a little bit more interaction with you, again, but remotely. So we're going to jump back to Menti. And what I'd like to ask you now is, so far, based on what you've seen, who are you most likely to share this presentation with? If I were to give you this slide deck, are you going to send it to your coworkers that couldn't make it, your boss who definitely wouldn't be angry at all at the implication? Would you share this with your boss's boss, who's a C-level, who definitely wouldn't take it personally? Is it going to go to another department that's been struggling, or do you just know perfect people and so you wouldn't need to share this with anyone? I really hope at least one person works with a perfect department. That's, yeah. All right. Okay, so my next question is, what's your LinkedIn profile and are you hiring? I kid, my boss.
We only take perfect people.
Dang it.
It's not sinners.
Well,
Sinners.
you know what? Fair enough. All right, I'll take it. Okay, so now that we've taken a break, back to copypastaphilia, because I know you're curious. By the way, we made up all of these terms. These aren't real words. People don't say this. Well, they do now, because this is being recorded and now there's evidence of it. So copypasta is a term that sometimes developers use to describe the act of going to Stack Overflow, copying the code and pasting it into a code base, but then what you get is a whole implementation of copy and pasted code that looks like spaghetti. So that's copypastaphilia, when you are addicted to copying and pasting. But this isn't a presentation about code. This is about brand experiences. It's when you copy a well-known experience in another brand and you paste it into your own. So, how many of you have asked the question, well, what does Amazon do? Well, what does Google do? Well, Facebook does it this way. We should do it that way. That's copypastaphilia. I'm sorry. I hate to break it to you, you've been sinning, but it's okay. I've done this too. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a website and copied and pasted some experience and put it, sometimes even on my own projects, when I've realized, Frank, you're not that important. You really don't need that fancy of a search, like no one searches on your site. So I have to remind myself of this constantly. And the most common example that comes up with this is I've got a large website, I've got tons of content, I've got 10,000 pages. What does Amazon do with their navigation? We should be doing that. Now, are you selling over 1 million products? Probably not. Does that mean that you need Amazon's experience? No. It's just that they're a well-known brand and that's what you want to do. But we constantly do this. We see a really well-known brand and we think, well, whatever they had, that must apply to me. Okay, so how do we course correct here? Paraphrase, we don't plagiarize. That doesn't mean copy and paste. What that means is we look at how they did it. We think about, well, okay, what kind of problem did they have? And do I have a problem that's similar to theirs? So if we've got a whole lot of website content, it's not wrong to look at Amazon's navigation and think, I wonder if it can help. The question is, well, what specific problem do I have with my navigation? Do I have a problem with second tier, third tier navigation? Maybe what I should do is look specifically at how Amazon is evaluating second and third level navigation. Or maybe I should look at, well, I don't think it's navigation, I think it's just findability. Maybe I should look at search. Maybe I should look instead at how Amazon integrates faceted search with navigation. Maybe that's the real problem that I have. And so what that means is that Amazon has invested millions upon millions of dollars in trying to find the right solution to their problem. Take advantage of all of the research and development that they've done and apply it into your specific area. So they've already done the hard work of figuring out hard problems with how people navigate a website. So what we do is we'll look at what our problem is, see, is it similar? And if it's similar, let's see if we can take some element of the problem and apply it, but apply it appropriately. Navigation is one example, but you can also do this with your design of headers and with your design of footers. You can even do this with how you design forms. Just take a look at, are they solving a problem similar to mine? And if so, well, maybe I can make use of some component of it. But I shouldn't do it exactly the way that they're doing it just because they did it. They're too big of a company and they had such a big and different problem. So don't copy and paste, and don't plagiarize, paraphrase. Make it work for your experience. All right. First paging. I'm guilty of this. I do this entirely too often. I think that a lot of folks are guilty of this as well. So what is first paging? Well, first paging is, well, think of going to Google. Have you ever had a problem and gone to Google and just read the first page of search results and now you know your answer? Maybe you read the summary of like a Gartner report and now you know everything there is to know about SDL's product. You read something like in a Gartner report that said, oh, the partner ecosystem is weak, and so now you're kind of like, I wonder if SDL has a good partner ecosystem at all, because you read that in one excerpt. Well, that's first paging. That's taking the first page of search results, the first page of a report, the first page of anything, and thinking that that is the whole story. It's not the whole story. So how do we course correct? How do we keep ourselves and others from first paging? Well, really, it's a constant reminder. We have to be cognizant that any content written on the web, probably even automatically content-generated content, it's written for short attention spans, and it's also going to be written for hidden agendas. Whether it's a Gartner report, or whether it's a blog post, or whether it's an entire white paper, there's still a hidden agenda there. And what's important isn't that you discredit that, it's that you are mindful of that as you're reading the content. And the other thing, too, is that you still take it upon yourself to do additional research, because that's not the whole story. For instance, and by the way, I really did search about SDL and the partner ecosystem, and what I found was one comment that said, the partner ecosystem is weak. And I could tell you right now, it's absolutely not true, because for one thing, SDL offers presentations constantly. You could interview any number of users of SDL products. As I work in the content management space, primarily with Tridian, I can tell you that that's a hugely robust community. We even have what's called an Ohio Valley user group, where here in the United States, there's a LinkedIn group that covers all of the Ohio users of SDL Tridian. They all get together on a quarterly basis, talk about how they're using the products, and talk about what their problems are and how they can get solutions for it. So I can tell you from my personal experience that SDL has an amazing partner ecosystem. But if you only read the first page of results, or if you only read a single article, you wouldn't know that. So the point here in first paging is what we want to do is dive deeper than that summary. Dive deeper than what is said on the first page of results. Baby giraffing. That's right, baby giraffing. I know you're all really excited about what could this possibly be, and it's way better than what you're thinking. All right? Right, so what is baby giraffing? I mean, you see a baby giraffe right here. It's bending down to eat something. What could that mean, Frank? Well, what that means is that I was very tired and exhausted when I was trying to think of a way to describe this. But baby giraffing is when we always go after the lowest hanging fruit. It's the shortcuts that you're taking constantly. It's, well, I've got to get this out yesterday, so I'm going to make whatever decision is necessary to get it out. It's always going after the shortest, lowest hanging fruit. Now, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that if you're a baby giraffe. As I see that there aren't any giraffes in here, I think that in this case, what we need to do is throw in this caveat that, well, baby giraffes grow up, and then they're not going after the low-hanging fruit anymore. So if you're always taking a technology shortcut, if you're always going with the easiest, fastest, dirtiest way to get a product out the door, if you're always doing that, that's baby giraffing. And that's fine, by the way, if you're in a department that's growing, or if you're in a company that's growing. Even if you're under extremely tight deadlines, on occasion, that's fine. We still have products that need to get delivered, so it's okay to baby giraffe, but really what we want to do is have a step stool in place. And the step stool, having that there, is what helps us eventually get to the higher hanging fruit. The way that plays out, so a few years ago, I was working for a client, and we were implementing an enterprise content management system that was SDL Tridian. And at that client, as we were in the process of implementing it, so we were building out all of our content models. As I was in that process, we had another department come in, and they said, we need a website out yesterday. We need to get this ride-sharing website out. It needs to be out right away. We've got to get it out there. Please get it out there. So we did it in WordPress. WordPress isn't awful, but this is a company that had spent a lot of money on SDL Tridian. and they were a Java shop, and they didn't know anything about how Apache worked. They didn't know anything about how PHP worked. They also didn't know how WordPress worked. I was the only person that knew any of those technologies, but we had to get it out the door. We got it out the door, and now the rest of IT is looking at me saying, great, now how do we keep it alive? How do we maintain it? Which, by the way, if you wanted to know how software negligence happens, it's sometimes this. So, whoops. Okay, what do we do to avoid baby giraffing in the future? We've talked about it. We've talked about the step stools. So in my WordPress example, what should I have done? I probably should have asked, well, hey, what's your tech stack look like? Okay, you're Java. So would it be okay for me to find some sort of content management system that's Java-based right now? And okay, well, what's your server stack? Could I find something that could better host this? Do you have anyone that knows WordPress? And if I had asked that question, they would have said no. And I said, okay, I'll keep looking for something that might be more familiar. But the point is, those are step stools. Yes, I have to go after low-hanging fruit because I've got to get something out the door. But I don't want to shoot myself in the foot. What I want to do is choose technology that even if it doesn't fit perfectly into my ecosystem, it can eventually fit in there. I want to choose something that'll help me step into the architecture that I want. So focus in on the important technologies that might help me get to that final architecture. Talk about the skills that might be necessary to maintain it. The whole idea here is that yes, sometimes we have to do it, but do the best that you can to help it scale and eventually grow into your desired architecture. Bandwagon-driven development. Oh man, this happens very often, and it happens in most of the clients and projects that I work with. Whether they know it or not, they're committing some degree of bandwagon-driven development. What is bandwagon-driven development? My parents used to say this when I was a kid. Well, if they jumped off a bridge, would you? And so if they're doing blockchain, should you? So how many of you have been in a meeting where you've heard blockchain? Well, okay, let's forget everything that's been going on this week. How many of you prior to this week have been in a meeting or another technology discussion that has involved blockchain, AI, machine learning, microservices, bots? I'll even throw out cloud. Okay, yeah. A friend of mine is a marketing, he's a copywriter for a company that sells oil rigging software. So he helps write the copy for a company whose job it is to take people who work on oil rigs and put them on oil rigs. That's his company's focus, oil rigs. 3 weeks ago, it came up in a conversation, should we be using blockchain? And my friend said, why? We put people on giant boats and machines that get oil out of the ground. What does blockchain have to do with that? Oh, I don't know, I've just heard it. Actual conversation that happened. And it's not, by the way, just blockchain. Cryptocurrency can go in here too. But the point is, it's bandwagon-driven development. Everyone else is doing this. I should be doing this. Some of you may know of a very, very large photography company a few years ago that wasn't doing so hot, and so they decided to try a cryptocurrency. It didn't help. Their stocks went up for a day, and then everyone figured out, oh, right, you make cameras. What could that possibly have to do with cryptocurrency? And then it went right back down. But they committed a very public sin of bandwagon-driven development. It's okay, by the way, to be interested in the latest and greatest. It's, in fact, great to be interested in the latest and greatest because these are, by the way, solutions to problems. Okay? So this is where we get into, well, how do we course correct in this? Technologies are tools. Knowing how to use them is what's important. Knowing how that tool helps you build a solution is what matters. Instead of bandwagon-driven development, where everyone else is doing it, so I should be doing it too, let's try solution-driven development. what that means is that you have to first take a step back and focus on what your problem is. Once you know what your problem is, now you can start working on your solution. So, okay, someone has brought up AI. Should we be using AI? Do we have a problem that AI can solve? Well, we're having a hard time getting the right content to the right people. We're working with this airline and they want to get content that's really focused on helping them understand how to interact with this airline better, and we want them to stay engaged. But we're having a challenge with getting this content perfectly nuanced for every user. Congratulations, you might have a use case now for AI because that sounds like a solution to a problem. And if you're planning on mining cryptocurrency, if you've got the problem of, you know what, we need to be the 1,000th cryptocurrency, well, now blockchain is a solution to that problem and we should start looking into it. Same deal with bots. Should you be using bots? Well, do you need an easy way to interact with people? Are you like me and don't really want to have to ask them questions directly and you'd rather use Menti? Well, if you're kind of like me, then maybe that's a case for bots where you need an automated way to interact with someone. Or more seriously, do you not have the manpower of a call center or a support center to interact with your customers? Do you need an interface that puts some space between you and whoever your support level is? That might be a good use case for bots. The focus is not on the technology, it's going back to the problem and the solution. Look at what your problem is, and then look and see if that brand new cutting edge technology that you might cut yourself on later, just take a step back and look and see if that's going to be the solution to the problem you're having. So with that, we can wrap up a few things, but first I do have some interactive questions for you. So we've gone through the 7 deadly sins. I'd like to ask a few more things. First thing that we want to find out, which sins have you been committing? Or which sins have you seen committed? You can pick 2, between bleeding edgism, data hoarding, software negligence, copypastaphilia, which is the most fun to say. First paging, baby giraffing, bandwagon-driven development. I can tell you that earlier last week, we were thinking about taking bets on which one we thought would win, and I was too frightened to actually put down any money. Oh, wow. All right, so now it's a competition, isn't it? All right, come on, baby giraffe. Come on. Come on, baby giraffe. You can do it. Almost there. All right. Think we'll give it another minute or? Okay, so now, don't go changing. By the way, we are going to be posting all of these results on our website, so you'll be able to come back later and see, oh man, software negligence and baby giraffing. That poor baby giraffe. Well, all right, so we can, I think, yeah, do we have anyone else that hasn't voted?
Everyone can select 2, in case you have.
All right. So with this, there's one other question that I'd like to ask. So, all right, so these are the sins that we've seen, but now this is a little bit of just, I'm curious. What do you think causes grief with your software? You should have 3 boxes where you can add in like 1 or 2 words. Just tell me, what do you think's causing you grief? What is causing you to commit these sins? So just take a second and share a few words. It could be Dilbert cartoons. It could be developers that have been watching too many episodes of Silicon Valley. So It could be DevOps that is entirely too angry and refuses to do database migrations. Could be a project manager that just really isn't interested in giving you another sprint's worth of work. Lack of budget, lack of resources, lack of vision. Oh, overkill. Bad fit. Not doing full research. Ooh, first paging. Overkill. Yep, that can happen. Complexity. Complexity, that can come as a result of how we think of our software. IT reluctance. Oh, antiquated. Yep. That's kind of the opposite of bleeding edgeism is, well, it's always worked this way, so why should we ever update it? Price, yep, that'll do it. That price, by the way, is one of those, cost is the leading cause of baby giraffing, I would say. The leading reason that you end up going for the shortest, fastest, easiest to implement solution is because somewhere in the background is cost. And yeah, being pressed for time, I'd throw that in with cost. But that leads to your baby giraffing. So this is interesting because we can see, okay, quality misconceptions. That's an interesting one that I just saw. Those misconceptions can be related to first paging when you haven't done enough research into the product or someone hasn't. Let's see, complexity though, I love that one. And something I want to call out with regard to complexity, there's a difference between complexity and complication. Complexity is usually a good thing because complexity means that there are many parts broken into appropriate areas. So when something is complex, what we're saying is, well, there's just many parts to it. When something is complicated, that means it's hard to understand. And sometimes we conflate the terms and we might say, oh, this is a complex solution, when actually it's complicated, which means it's hard to understand. And sometimes what we want to do to describe a solution is we want to say it's complex, because that's a good thing, because after all, there's many small pieces and they are interrelated well. But complexity, by the way, complexity can lead to overkill. And I would say that complexity is one of the, when you have something we're calling it complex, but it's actually complicated, that's what leads to software negligence. So that's something to consider, that if you have a solution that seems too hard to follow, that means it's going to be hard to maintain. All right, so one last question that I'd like to ask, and as I ask this, this is really more of your free-range, open-air, ask anything you want. So it's, do you have anything you'd like to confess? Now, what that means is, do you have any other comments, any other questions, concerns, and thoughts? So I'll let you take your time to answer this last question. We're not going to do it here, because we're going to leave this open for the rest of the day so that you can think about it. And we'll switch back to our wrap-up here, because we've talked about our sins openly. I've admitted that I've made some terrible mistakes. But what's the idea here? Well, one, we're all sinners. It's not like it's just me. It's not like it's just you. We all make these mistakes. What's important, though, is that we recognize those mistakes. And that's what we've done here, is we've talked about these mistakes openly and honestly, and we've said, okay, these are mistakes that I've made, and now that I've admitted to these mistakes that I've made, or the mistakes that I see my organization making, it's not so that I feel bad, it's not so that you feel bad, it's so that you can course correct. Now that we know that there are mistakes, now that we know that they're having an impact at the enterprise level, how do we course correct? So we're reacting to the problem, and that's what we focus on. And we've talked about ways to course correct, and regardless of the sin, whether it's one of these or it's another one of the 45 other deadly software sins that might be slightly less deadly, it's always going to be recognize it, see how it affects you at the enterprise level, and how do you course correct. And just so that all of you know, we are going to have all of the results of the surveys that you filled out. That'll be on our blog. And what we'll be doing after this is we're going to be writing a full series of blog posts on each one of these sends. So if you want, you can go to Accelerate's blog and you can sign up, and you'll get notice when we get our results out, and you'll get notice of when each of those blog posts come out. And with that, thank you very much for your time.